The mind doesn't stop. Not when the day ends, not when the body asks for rest. Thoughts return, scenes repeat themselves, small worries gain too much weight, and inside something begins to wear down in silence. Billy Graham spoke of this invisible fatigue as one of the most ignored conflicts of the human being. Not something dramatic, but constant, persistent, capable of slowly draining the soul. Here there are no long explanations or ready-made speeches, only a direct reflection on this mind that never rests, on what happens when no one notices, and on what many people feel, but rarely stop to face. Over time, many people begin to feel a weariness they can't quite explain. There isn't a specific event that caused it. There is no exact day when everything changed. It is something that formed gradually. The mind became busy all the time, even when nothing urgent was happening. Thoughts appear uninvited, repeat themselves, overlap, and rarely leave space for real rest. This conflict is common, but it is almost never recognized as such. It hides behind routine, obligations, the feeling of always solving something. The person keeps functioning, completes tasks, answers messages, makes decisions. On the outside, everything seems normal. On the inside, the mind is always active, always processing, always anticipating. There is no clear silence between one thought and another. Many believe this is part of adult life. That thinking too much is a sign of responsibility, care, attention. And so they go on, without realizing that this constant movement begins to demand a price. Not an immediate visible price, but a continuous silent wear that accumulates day after day. What's most curious is that this conflict rarely draws attention. It doesn't interrupt the routine. It doesn't prevent the person from working or talking. It simply takes up space, inner space. Little by little, the mind becomes the noisiest place of the day, even when everything around is quiet. Many people feel this without fully realizing it. They wake up already tired even after sleeping. They struggle to be present in simple moments. They notice a mild impatience, a constant restlessness, but don't know exactly where it comes from. It's not something easy to talk about because there are no clear words to describe it. This conflict goes unnoticed precisely because it has become habitual. Thinking all the time has become the standard. Being mentally occupied has become normal. And so, without realizing it, many people live with a mind that never rests, believing this is simply the way things are, without noticing how much it has already affected the way they feel, perceive, and exist in their daily lives. Billy Graham used to look at this kind of conflict with great attention to what happens inside. For him, the problem was rarely only in external circumstances. What caught his attention most was people's inner state, especially when the mind could no longer find silence. He did not see this as weakness, but as a sign of an internal disconnection that develops slowly. In his observations, the restless mind was the result of a life lived almost entirely outward. Too many decisions, too many demands, too many external voices, too little space for personal listening, too little time to notice what is truly being felt. Billy Graham understood that when inner silence disappears, the person keeps functioning, but begins to lose contact with themselves. He spoke of inner awareness as something that needs quiet to exist, not a forced silence, but an inner space where a person can hear themselves without interruptions. When that space disappears, the mind tries to compensate, thinking more, analyzing more, controlling more. And this constant effort ends up generating even more fatigue. The person looks around and realizes they are not alone, yet feels as if they are. Conversations exist, connections exist, laughter happens, and still something is missing when everything ends. Billy Graham observed this discomfort as a deep conflict of the modern human being, where the presence of many does not guarantee real connection with anyone. What begins here is not an analysis or a ready-made answer, but a direct reflection on having friends, having social interaction, and still carrying that uneasy feeling of being alone inside without knowing exactly what is wrong. At many moments in life, a person realizes they are surrounded by people, but that does not prevent a strange feeling of distance. There are messages on the phone, occasional invitations, frequent conversations. Even so, when the day ends, there remains a hard-to-explain sensation, as if something essential never happened in those interactions. This conflict is more common than one might think. It does not arise from a lack of people, but from the way relationships are lived. The person participates, responds, shows up, yet feels that they are rarely truly seen. Not because others do not care, but because conversations often stay on the surface, confined to what feels safe to say. Many live with this without clearly noticing it. They attribute the discomfort to fatigue, a busy routine, a lack of time. They continue maintaining relationships, but feel that something in them never reaches a deeper level. There is company, but little genuine exchange. There is presence, but little emotional intimacy. This feeling goes unnoticed because it does not stop life from moving forward. The person remains socially active, attends gatherings, maintains connections. From the outside, there appears to be no loneliness. Inside, there is the impression that no one truly knows what they feel or think when they are alone with themselves. Over time, this creates a sense of displacement. Being with other people brings no rest. Being alone brings no relief either. A feeling emerges of not fully belonging anywhere. Not because of explicit rejection, but because of the absence of genuine connection. The hardest part is recognizing this conflict, because it seems contradictory. How can someone feel lonely while having friends? How can this emptiness be explained when there is no lack of social contact? For this reason, many people keep this feeling in silence, believing they should not feel this way. This state becomes part of emotional routine. The person learns to live with it without questioning it much. They maintain relationships, fulfill social roles, but carry the feeling that something important is always missing. Many people experience this without clearly realizing it, believing it is simply part of adult life, when in fact it is an emotional wear that slowly builds. Billy Graham often looked at this form of loneliness with great attention to people's inner world. For him, it was not the absence of people that created this feeling, but the absence of connection with oneself. He observed that someone could be surrounded by voices, full schedules, and constant relationships, and still feel a void that was hard to name. In his observations, this type of loneliness emerged when social life became too functional. Conversations happened, meetings repeated themselves, but almost always revolved around what was expected, convenient, or superficial. The person participated, laughed, responded, but felt that little of what they truly carried inside found space to exist in relationships. Billy Graham noticed that when this happens, the person begins to adapt. They learn to show only the parts of themselves that are well accepted. They keep doubts, insecurities, and deeper conflicts to themselves, not for lack of courage, but for lack of true listening. Over time, this adaptation creates an inner distance that is difficult to cross. For him, inner awareness played a central role in this process. When a person stops listening to themselves, they begin to seek in others something that should start within. Relationships become attempts at filling a void rather than spaces for exchange. The more this repeats, the more the feeling of loneliness grows, even with many people around. Billy Graham observed that this accompanied loneliness is rarely recognized as such. It disguises itself as normality. The person believes they are simply living life like everyone else. But inside, they feel they are not truly known, that there is a part of them that never enters the conversations. He also noted that the problem was not in the friends themselves, but in the difficulty of personal listening. When someone cannot recognize what they feel, they cannot share it clearly. Communication becomes limited, and bonds remain on the surface. For Billy Graham, this state was not a moral error or a flaw of character. It was a sign of inner disconnection, a gradual distancing between what a person lives externally and what they experience internally. Social life remained active, but inner life became increasingly isolated. His view did not point to quick solutions or abrupt changes. It was a patient observation of how a human being can feel alone even while accompanied, when contact with one's own interior life is lost. Not as something to be fixed immediately, but as something to be perceived with greater honesty. In modern life, this kind of loneliness finds room to grow even amid constant interaction. There are groups, networks, endless messages, meetings scheduled in advance. The calendar may be full, but that does not guarantee real closeness. Many relationships exist, but few allow someone to be fully seen. The fast pace contributes to this. Conversations are quick, interrupted, divided by screens and other demands. People talk about work, commitments, daily events, but rarely enter more sensitive territory. Not from lack of interest, but from lack of emotional time. Everything needs to be functional, light, easy to consume. At work, this becomes even stronger. People spend hours together, share tasks, solve problems as a team, yet maintain a careful distance. There is coexistence, but little openness. Personal life stays outside. What one truly feels almost never enters the conversation. Even outside the professional environment, the same logic repeats itself. Social gatherings are scheduled, but often happen in a rush. There are laughs, comments, exchanges of information, but little deep listening. Each person arrives carrying their own fatigue and leaves carrying what did not fit into words. Social media amplifies this feeling. Never has it been so easy to follow the lives of so many people. Photos, opinions, daily updates create the impression of closeness. But this closeness is limited. It shows fragments, not whole experiences. And the more one sees the lives of others, the more the feeling of being disconnected from one's own grows. Over time, the person learns to adapt to this format. They show more acceptable versions of themselves. They avoid topics that might create discomfort. They keep conversations safe. This helps maintain connections, but weakens the feeling of being truly known. Coexistence continues, but loneliness remains. At night, when the movement slows, this perception can become clearer. The day was full of interactions, but something is missing, hard to name. It is not the absence of people, it is the absence of real exchange. The person realizes they spoke a lot, but said little of what truly mattered. Perhaps you have felt this before. Being in a conversation and still feeling distant, laughing along while sensing that no one noticed how you really were. These moments usually pass quickly, but they leave behind a trace of emotional exhaustion. Modern life values constant connection, but does not always favor depth. There is little space for pauses, for unhurried listening, for conversations that do not need to lead anywhere. And without this space, relationships continue to exist, but they do not sustain the human need to be seen and understood. This scenario does not create loneliness in an obvious way. It creates shallow coexistence that stretches on for years. The person does not isolate themselves, but also does not feel truly accompanied. They live among people, yet carry the impression of always being on their own when it comes to what they feel. Thus, the conflict remains, not as a visible drama, but as a continuous experience. The person stays socially active but emotionally distant. And the more this becomes normalized, the harder it is to realize that being surrounded by people is not the same as being truly accompanied. When the meetings end and the conversations stop, something changes. The person goes home after having talked, listened, laughed, and participated, but realizes that none of it truly remained. The environment grows quieter, and a feeling that is hard to ignore emerges, as if the presence of others never reached what truly needed to be touched. At that moment, there is no external conflict. No one is absent. And yet, the impression appears of being alone with what one feels. The person mentally revisits the interactions of the day and realizes that much was said, but little was truly shared. What mattered most was kept inside. This state usually arises when there is no one else around. Not as intense sadness, but as a light and persistent emptiness. A sense that despite so many relationships, there is no one who truly knows what is happening inside. There is no space where words do not need to be filtered or emotions adjusted. Nothing needs to be solved here. This moment does not ask for explanation or immediate change. It simply reveals the difference between coexistence and connection. It shows that it is possible to be surrounded by people and still feel that no one was truly present. This awareness lingers for a few moments and then blends back into routine. But while it lasts, it makes clear that loneliness does not always come from the absence of people, but from the absence of true encounter. When this feeling of accompanied loneliness extends over time, it begins to affect how the person perceives themselves. It does not happen dramatically. It is a slow, almost imperceptible process. Gradually, an impression forms that something is wrong within, even without being able to clearly identify what it is. Coexistence continues, but it starts to feel more tiring than it should. Being with people requires effort. Maintaining conversations demands energy, not because others are the problem, but because there is wear in being present without feeling truly seen. The person begins to feel strange for carrying this emptiness, even while having bonds. Over time, a tendency to close off slightly emerges, not as a conscious isolation, but as protection, speaking less about what one feels, avoiding deeper topics, keeping relationships functioning without exposing oneself too much. This preserves coexistence, but increases inner distance. This state also affects how the person deals with moments alone. The absence of company brings no relief, because the sense of having no one with whom to share what matters was already present before. Being alone